My name's Jason Needleman. I'm interim chair of History and Political Science, which houses the International Studies Institute that is hosting this event. Thank you all so much for being here. I in particular want to acknowledge we have that Acting Provost Kwan is here. We have Cass Dean, Shannon Matthews is here. We have VP of Finance, Avo Koshishian. We have VP of Advancement, Sherry Mylott. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to the whole audience for coming and supporting this event and supporting the International Studies Institute. I'm going to get out of the way. We are going to invite our 19th president. It's 19th, right? I know something about her. September 27th is her birthday. That's today. Happy birthday. So I'll invite Pardis Mahdavi, newest president of the University of La Verne, to share some remarks.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you so much to Dr. Nadelman for properly embarrassing me. It is my birthday. It is also the birthday of the provost, Dr. Roy Kwan. So I get to share the embarrassment here. What are the odds that your president and your provost would have the same birthday? Well, I just want to welcome all of you here and to really express my deepest gratitude to all of you for attending this very special lecture. When I got to learn a little bit about our speaker, I was so honored and so touched that she is here with us today. And learning about the mission of this lecture series has been so inspiring to me as it resonates so deeply with the values of the University of La Verne. I would be remiss in not acknowledging the fact that today's lectureship was made possible by our wonderful alumnus and trustee, and someone who I get to call a friend, Paul Mosley, class of 1988, in honor of probably our most beloved faculty member, also a dear friend of mine, Dr. Ahmed Esfahani, and his late cousin and former, yes, Dr. Esfahani inspires all of us and inspires and gives me strength every single day. So it was dedicated by Trustee Mosley in Dr. Esfahani's honor, as well as in honor of his cousin and former Pakistan Prime Minister, Benazir Bhutto. So it's an incredibly special lecture. For the past 15 years, the university has invited high-profile international speakers to our campus community to speak about social issues affecting our world today. And this lectureship is more than just a speaker series. It puts the University of La Verne on the map globally, and it brings the global home, which I think is another one of our proud values that I'm really excited to see lived through this event today. This Benazir Bhutto Esfahani lecture is a reflection of our commitment to our students that offers both academic and social perspectives. A word about my own work. As many of you know, I myself am an anthropologist by training. I'm a medical anthropologist. And my work in my career has focused on social justice issues. I've written 7 books. My focus has always been the Middle East. And I've focused on issues such as gender, sexuality, labor migration, and human trafficking in the Middle East. All subjects which this lectureship speaks to, and which so many of our faculty, students, and staff are committed to exploring, both in a local context as well as a global context. So it's meaningful for me personally, but also incredibly meaningful for our community. The University of La Verne is fortunate to have a lectureship series which honors and continues the incredible legacy of Benazir Bhutto, as well as our beloved Dr. Ahmed Esfahani. Now it is my great pleasure to invite Dr. and Professor Julie Minoves-Truquel, Associate Professor and Director of the International Studies Institute, to introduce our illustrious guest speaker. Please join me in welcoming her.
Madam President Mahdavi, Provost Kwon, Dean Matthews, our very distinguished colleague for whom this lecture is named, Dr. Ahmed Isfahani, colleagues in the department, Melissa Hernandez, who has done a lot of work to organize this lecture, thank you very much. All of you, welcome to this 14th lecture, Benazir Bhutto and Ahmed Isfahani International Lecture. This year we have a personality from Africa, a woman politician from Africa, liberal woman politician from Africa. It's quite exceptional. And thank you for doing this long trip from your home in Rabat through Casablanca, London, and New York, and finally here to be with us today. Now, why is Dr. Hakima El Hayteh so exceptional? She is a former Minister of Environment of the Kingdom of Morocco. In 2015, she was elected a Vice President of the United Nations Paris Climate Conference. And for her role, for her job, for her excellent job at that conference, the President of France, President Hollande at the time, awarded her the highest honor of the French state. She's a Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur in December 2016. That same year, she was appointed a high-level climate champion of the Conference of Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change for COP22. COP22 happened in Marrakesh, and she was the host of that conference in that beautiful city of Marrakesh. Dr. El Hayteh is twice a doctor. She has 2 PhDs, one in environmental studies from the University of Meknes in her own country, and one in environmental engineering from the École des Mines de Saint-Étienne in France. She's also the first president of Liberal International, the World Federation of Liberal and Democrat Parties, from a non-European country. She has been named one of the 100 most influential people on climate policy by Apolitical in 2019, 2022, 2024, and the latest as well. And yesterday I was reading Forbes magazine, and there it was, the name of Dr. Hakima El Hayteh as one of the most influential people in climate right now. In fact, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres, has appointed her this year a member of his advisory board of eminent persons on zero waste, and she was in New York with him, with the Secretary General of the United Nations, just a few days ago during the beginning of the General Assembly discussing climate change. We are extremely honored that you're here, and I would like now to give you the floor so you can tell us more about what you're doing and about this pressing issue for our time, climate change. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Hello, La Verne University, Madam President, Mr. Provost, dear Dean, dear all of you, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining this lecture. Let me, at the beginning, thank Mr. Julie Minoves, the director of the International Studies Institute, and also Melissa for organizing this lecture. Dr. Minoves, who generously introduced me, thank you for giving me this opportunity to address this exceptional gathering. Thank you, Madam President, for being here. And I'm very, very honored that Mr. Mr. Ahmed Asbahani is here in person together with us. Thank you for continuing to inspire all of us and to inspire the world. Thank you for this lecture, which is organized under the banner of sorry. So I was asked to talk to you about climate change and international relations. I did have the opportunity to meet with some children yesterday, some students yesterday, and I want to begin the story by the beginning. Let me tell you what is still my bitter memory in this story of climate change. I was involved since 1994, and since the first COP, or conference of climate change, was happening in 1995 in Berlin. And the bitter memory I kept in my mind and in my heart was when the Prime Minister of the Philippines came to the conference of the Paris Agreement in 2015 after his country was devastated by floods and hurricanes. And that time he said, each time I am coming to such conference, I have the feeling that we are deciding for whom will die and whom will survive. And this make me realize how important were these negotiations. In fact, we are talking about the COP, Climate Conference for Climate Change. This COP is gathering or brings together 195 countries that have different interests, that are either producers of oil and producers of CO2 emissions, or that have different vulnerabilities to climate change. These people need, these parties or these nations need to agree on the same objective, is to decrease the global warming. To decrease the global warming to 1.5 degrees C. And you can imagine that it's a very, very complex negotiations, because we are talking about environment? No, we are talking about development, we are talking about the power of oil, we are talking about trade, we are talking about the way we will develop our nations. So it was very, very complex. And believe me, before I went to the Paris Agreement, because I was working with the French presidency since 2014. Before going to the Paris Agreement in 2015, I was sure that we will not succeed in having an agreement. But we did it. We did it. And the Paris Agreement was a historical agreement. And that time, for the first time, we involved all those who should be around the same table to change the world. The local authorities, the subnationals, the business, the civil society, and we create a dual COP for the first time of the history of the negotiation. And that was great, and we believed that the Paris Agreement was in itself an achievement. Indeed, it's an achievement. But let's discuss together, where are we from the Paris Agreement? So first, let me explain what is climate change for our students. This is a change in the pattern of the weather, and it's an increase of the global warming and the temperature. And the increase of the temperature has very, very big consequences on the earth and on human beings. So climate change, the cause or the root cause is the emissions of CO2 emissions. And we know that CO2 emissions is coming essentially from oil, gas, and coal incineration. So it's related to human activities in general, and that was proved now by the latest report of the IPCC in 2022. So the consequences are the rise of the level of the sea, and you can see here that many countries, and especially the small islands, are threatened by the rise of the level of the sea. They might disappear by some of them by 2050, and most of them by 2100. And I remember one president who was saying every time, save Tuvalu, you will save the world. That means that if we save the most vulnerable country in the world, which is Tuvalu, which is a very small island, we will save the world. And that was remarkable. So the rise of the level of the sea, and the latest report of the IPCC said that the rise of the level of the sea will vary from 0.3 to 0.6 meter in the best scenarios. And that's huge. It means that many kilometers on the land will be flooded by the level of the sea. Also, the melt of the ice, and you can imagine what are the consequences when ice is melting. And today, we have lost something like 6 times the volume of the ice in the Groenland between 2010 and 2019. It means that the melt of the ice is increasing very fast, and the consequences are floods, the consequences are new viruses, the consequences are extensions of all the biodiversity of this area. The latest report of the IPCC said that 10 towns are at the risk to be flooded by 2100, and you can see these towns are present in all the continents, from United States to Africa to Asia to Latin America to Europe. You have all, in each continent, we are at the risk to see some towns flooded by the rain and the increase of the extreme weather conditions. So this is to give you an idea about disasters which happened last years and last months, because you will see that the fire in Canada, which the smoke of this fire reached New York and even Paris, the fire in Portugal, in Spain, floods in Portugal, in Spain. And this means a huge impact, not only life cost, because many deaths happened in such disasters, but also a huge cost in terms of expenses. The increase of temperature is also degrading the land and threatening the food security and the water, access to drinking water in Africa and in the global south in general. So to set the scene, we have made in the Paris Agreement in 2015, and we had decided together to implement the Paris Agreement and to commit to certain point, I will say, after this slide. But the problem is, and we did have an appointment at 2020 to come together with the promises of the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement was supposed to enter and to be implemented from 2020 to now. What happened in 2020? We had the pandemic, And we had the pandemic with all its social and economic and consequences. And we postponed the meeting of the Convention of Climate Change. Then in 2022, we had the war in Ukraine. And the war in Ukraine was a war which showed how much we are interdependent, interconnected in everything we are doing. The war in Ukraine threatened Europe by energy insecurity. The war in Ukraine threatened Africa by food insecurity, because we all know that Ukraine and Russia are the biggest reservoir of wheat, oil, and gas. So what happened after the war in Ukraine? Some countries were obliged to reopen coal industries because they needed energy. It's too cold. And they needed energy, they opened the coal industry. They increased the amount of storage of their gas and oil. And they increased the subsidies for fossil fuel. So what happened since 2022, when we had to implement the promises of the Paris Agreement, we did increase CO2 emissions. So, big tensions means big prices. The war in Ukraine has led to an increase in inflation everywhere in the world, not only in Europe, where the war is happening at the back door, but also in Africa, in Latin America. The global south was really affected by this war. And the global south was not only affected, but was demotivated, because he was seeing that the North is opening coal industries, that the North is subsidizing more fuel, etc. So there have been a discussion when I was, and we were told that the trust we built in the Paris Agreement is decreasing because we are moving from crisis to crisis, and these crises are overshadowing the priority, which is to tackle a vital issue, which is the one of climate change, which is threatening the global south on a daily basis. And that was when we began the negotiation of the Paris Agreement. We were thinking that the climate impacts are only felt in the global south, in the developing countries. But we realize now, after that the IPCC released the latest report, that this is not the question of the North and the South anymore, that the climate disasters are increasing everywhere in the world, that the climate disasters are, instead of being the exception, are becoming the common ground for all the countries. So this is what we realized after the catastrophe in Canada, in Portugal, in Spain, and also in Pakistan, in Nigeria, where 1/3 of the country was flooded very recently. So the prices, in figures, what we have and what the global south is still saying, and I'm explaining that because you will understand through this, you will understand why there are some friction in the negotiations and in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. The global south now lack access to drinking water. 1.4 or 4 million of people have no access to sanitation, have no access to drinking water. More than 1 billion people have no access to energy. 600 million people in Africa have no access to electricity. And these are the global south generally, we in the Global South, we found a huge reservoirs of minerals, of oil, of coal. I was discussing with the Minister of Industry of Madagascar, who told me that he is not able to develop the country, and he has the biggest reservoir of coal in the world. And he said, how can it be that in the north they are reopening coal industry and they don't want us to, and they don't want to invest in our coal, and we cannot develop our industry with the renewable. This is what he was said, because the renewable are intermittent, so they cannot develop the country. So the Global South is now building its development. And what happened in the Paris Agreement? The North and the developed country who are responsible for the historical emission of the CO2 were saying we need to come together and to contribute together. But the South was saying, okay, we will contribute depending on our capacity, but we have the right to develop our countries. We are talking about, when we talk about Africa, for example, 75% of the infrastructure is not existing yet. So we need to develop the continent. And if you help us to develop the continent, then we will implement the Paris Agreement in 2016. Now, the agreement in Paris was, first, to decrease CO2 emissions. This is what we say, call mitigation, mitigate the CO2 emissions. And the first producers are the developed world, Europe and United States. Now, in the discussion, China, who was already a very big producer, I was advocating in the Paris Agreement to put not the developed world and the developing world, but to put the industrial world and the developing world. But China was very, very aggressive during the negotiation, and they refused to accept the terms of industrial world. So what happened is that China now is considering itself like a developing country, and it's calling and requesting the right to develop China. So China was building coal industries, 4 coal installations per week, and it's become one of the biggest emitter of CO2 emissions in the world. But it's considered through the Paris Agreement as a developing country. And China has fixed the carbon neutrality by 2060, while United States, Europe, all the developed world has fixed the commitment for carbon neutrality at 2050. So how to tackle climate change? Now that we know how to tackle climate change. We knew already during the Paris Agreement that we have to decrease CO2 emissions. That we already knew. And we knew already in the Paris Agreement that time, in 2050, we were at the risk to increase the global warming to 3.5 degrees C. Then now, after many years, what we have witnessed, we did not do any progress. This is the reality of the figures. The CO2 emissions is in constant increase instead of decreasing. So since the Paris Agreement, we were very busy with the crisis, and we didn't achieve, we are preparing. When I see the pledges, when I see the innovators, when I see how much innovation we have developed since the Paris Agreement, I'm really amazed. And I can tell you that here in California, you are the beacon of innovation in the world when it comes to climate change. But I was asked by one student yesterday, if we have the innovation, if the bad news is that we did nothing, and the good news, we have the innovation, why didn't we implement these innovations? Why didn't we transform our societies? Because this is what the climate agreement is about. The climate accord is about a global transformation if our way of production, our way of manufacturing, our way of transportation, our way of building, and of electrification and lighting, etc. So we know now how to do all this. At the beginning, it was very difficult to change the cars. At the beginning, the batteries autonomy was 40, 80 kilometers. Now we reach 400 kilometers. At the beginning, it was very expensive. Now the prices are very competitive. Renewable energy. Now renewable energy is the most competitive energy in the world. And still, we are not implementing such technologies. That was the question of one of the students yesterday, and I will try to bring an answer while I'm talking. Just to summarize, the cost of inaction is costing us between 3 to 5% now, and it will cost us between 3 to 30% of our global GDP in 2100, and this is in the, I would say, the most optimistic scenario. It means that now there are some effects of climate change which are irreversible. So what are we doing to tackle climate change? Yes, this is a very nice slide, and we are subsidizing and investing 100 billion in health per year. The world is investing 121 billion a year in renewable energy. The whole aid of the international organizations and state to the developing world is only 142 billion. But when it comes to subsidizing fossil fuel, we are subsidizing by 425 billion a year fossil fuel. So the answer to the question of the student of yesterday is simply this. No businessman, no businesswoman will invest in any new technology as far as the government and the policies are still subsidizing oil and fossil fuel. So this is, if we want to advance, we should phase out coal, oil, and gas. What is happening now is that some countries, powerful countries, are not ready in terms of technology. The technology is not there, or some material or minerals needed for the technology are not there. So now we are preparing the technology, we are preparing the resources to develop such kind of industry. What is happening now is that we have decided that not to invest in the global south on gas, for example, which is a fossil fuel, but we still invest on gas in the developed world. So the dilemma here, or dilemma, the dilemma here is that the North is willing to implement the Paris Agreement and to reach the carbon neutrality, but not in its own territory, because in the developed world, all the infrastructure is already existing. The buildings are existing. The transport is already existing. Everything is existing. In the developed world, developing world, we are talking about 75% of the infrastructure which is not existing yet. So the recommendation of the North to the South, please transform your economy, be climate friendly, invest in low carbon technologies, we will give you loans. If you don't, we are not giving money. This is the message of the North. The message of the South is, we are not responsible for the CO2 emissions. You have the historical responsibility, and you should pay for it. So the North is saying, we are supporting you. The South is saying, you are not supporting us. This is a duty, this is a question of fairness, justice, and responsibility. So this is where we are now from the Paris Agreement. We have decided indeed in Paris to come together and to contribute together to decrease the CO2 emissions, because we all have understood that climate change has no borders, no nationality, no religion, and each ton which is produced here is impacting another country in another continent. So we have understood that, all of us, and we agreed, all of us, that we will come together and contribute together under the principle of common responsibility, common and differentiated responsibility. That means that the developed world is obliged to implement the Paris Agreement, and the developing world will implement the Paris Agreement depending on its capacity. Look, one example. When there is a climate disaster here in the United States, when you have hurricanes, for example, with a massive destruction, the United States has the capacity, the financial capacity, and the expertise and the know-how to cope and to deal with a climate disaster. When a climate disaster is happening in a developing country, then there is no finance, no expertise, massive debts, and a huge destruction without any windows of opportunities to rebuild the country very quickly. This is the difference, and this what are the South asking for: loss and damage. Loss and damage means that the developed world should compensate the South on all the losses and damage which are occurring because of climate disasters. Now, so you can understand that it will be a huge deal to accept one of the or the other of the positions and the scenarios. It will take time. I'm very optimistic, but the problem is that even if we are optimistic, we should also be realistic, because climate disasters are everywhere in the world, and the developing countries are paying the bill on a daily basis, and this since long time before. So, dealing with climate change, we understand that it was complex. We understand that if we want to change the philosophy, the culture, the behavior, the way we are building, the way we are manufacturing, if we need to implement the global transformation called for by the Paris Agreement, we need to reset our way of rethinking our development. So this is a complete shift in our model of development. This is exactly what the Paris Agreement is about. And that means that we have to rethink our international agreement, trade international agreement. We have to rethink our policies, because if you have the right policy, you can give a signal to the local authorities, you can give a signal to business, to manufacturers, etc. If you have the right policies, you are giving a huge signal to the citizens. So the Paris Agreement is a development, it's not only an environmental agenda, it's an economic agenda, is a social agenda, is a development agenda, is a peace agenda, because the consequences of climate change will bring more than 250 million people to migrate from their country to go to the north, looking for a better life in the north. And I'm coming from a region where we have hundreds of deaths on a daily basis in the Mediterranean Sea. So people are migrating because climate change is posing problems of conflict around the resources, around the scarcity of water, around forests, etc. So climate change is a development agenda, is a peace agenda. And we know that if we want to implement this global transformation, we need not only to make pledges, but to make the right policies and to give the right signal for the global community. We need also to increase the awareness of the civil society and especially the citizens. Let me tell you that I was in New York and I was in the street and I asked many people in the street because I was very, very astonished about the amount of waste which was lying on the street at 0 a.m. At the end of the night. They lie all the waste and the garbage in the street. And I was asking people about their how much they are involved with climate friendly actions and practices. I'm very astonished that the nation who teach us the hope, the dream, the innovation, who was leading the world, and I think that United States should lead the world, should continue to inspire us and to bring innovation. I was saying yesterday that during the climate negotiation, when China and United States were aligned together and were pushing the negotiation, we were moving. When China and the United States were blocking the negotiation was stopped. We could not implement the Kyoto Protocol, which is a previous protocol for CO2 emissions, because United States and Canada was not in, and China was not in. And we will not implement the Paris Agreement if United States is not in and it's leading. I'm very happy to say, to see that President Biden has established his Green Deal. I hope that the operation of the Congress, the Republicans and the Democrats will allow us to see this Green Deal happening. Because when the United States will transform the market, China will follow and the world will follow. Imagine that you have only electrical cars, all the world will follow and will go to climate-friendly production of cars. So I hope that we will relay and will be able to see the global transformation happening here in the United States and in Europe. And I hope also that COP28 will deliver on the Paris Agreement's commitment. Many promises were done in the Paris Agreement, like 100 billion to support the Global South, to cope with climate change, and nothing happened. The transfer of technology, increase of the ambitions of the NDCs, all these promises need to be kept in order to regain the trust and to allow the international community to move. This is just to tell you very briefly that, like the war, climate change is killing. And we are not aware about this threat unless we are inside a climate disaster. I hope that we will not leave a climate disaster and we can take action on an individual level, on local level, on national level, and on international level. We cannot do anything on our own. No country is able to tackle climate change on its own. We are obliged to be on board together, and I hope that together with you and in your university, Madam President, you will introduce climate change as a pillar of all the disciplines, because now we need to transform the mindset of those who will build our building, of those who will light our building, of those who will ensure our transportation. Now we need to transform the world of those who will take care of our solid waste. I was telling yesterday that here in the United States, the average of production of solid waste is 4 kilograms per equivalent habitant. In Africa and Asia, the average is 0.6 kilograms per equivalent habitant. This is to say how our consumption and our individual responsibility can be engaged, and how we can be involved in changing the world and implementing this global transformation called for by the Paris Agreement. I was very long. Thank you so much for listening to me. I'm at your disposal if you have any question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's the moment that we have every year. And we welcome Dr. Hakima El Haytay's husband also, Dr. Loubaris Taoufik. Thank you very much for being here with her. And Dr. Ispahani will give Dr. Hakima El Haytay the Bhutto Ispahani Award.
It was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much for coming all the way from Morocco here and representing us, representing the country, and telling us about the issues.
I was not expecting an award. Thank you so much. Thank you all for your tolerance to my very bad English. Next time, if you talk French, I will do it in French. You will see it will be amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, for receiving me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for attending this wonderful conference and presentation. Appreciate that very much. Thank you once again.